Late 19th century Europe and America were consumed by an intellectual crisis. Traditional religious narratives were fracturing, leaving two dominant, opposing camps to define the fate of human consciousness. On one side stood the ascendant materialist sciences. Biologists and physiologists reduced human existence to a complex combination of molecules, categorizing consciousness as a byproduct of measurable biological and physiological functions. Physiology measures the functions of individual organs, yet every molecule in a living organ contains the germ of its own decay. By focusing on the breakdown and replacement of parts, these sciences catalog the process of death, while the animating force of life remains a riddle. In opposition to the materialists stood popular spiritualism. Across the globe, mediums gathered in darkened parlors to facilitate communication with what they believed were the immortal souls of the deceased. The Russian philosopher Helena Blavatsky challenged both perspectives. Her esoteric philosophy claimed that both the scientific and spiritualist communities were operating on flawed premises. Blavatsky argued that biology is merely the study of physical decay, while seance mediums communicate with decaying psychological corpses rather than immortal spirits. Grasping Blavatsky's mechanics of reincarnation requires abandoning the concept of a single, unified human soul. Her taxonomy divides the human entity into two incompatible systems. The first is the false personality, a temporary construction of the physical body, vital energy, an astral double, and earthly animal desires. The second system is the immortal ego. This is the eternal spiritual essence fused with the highest capacities of the abstract mind. These two halves are bound together only for the duration of a single human lifespan. They remain in a state of constant tension throughout existence. The personal identity, name, and memories you hold right now are products of the false personality. In this framework, your current sense of self is a construct strictly destined for total annihilation. This is the septenary concept, a 7-part blueprint of the human entity. The bottom 4 principles comprise the false personality: physical body, life force, astral double, and animal desires. The top 3 form the immortal ego, the divine monad and higher intellect, persisting through every incarnation. Because the dense matter of the personality is bound to gravity, while the ego pulls towards spiritual abstraction, death causes these opposing forces to snap. The connection breaks, creating a mechanical separation where the lower principles sink, while the higher principles are discharged upward. Death functions as a sorting mechanism. It instantly divides the eternal spiritual essence from the perishable material shell. The false personality, weighed down by earthly passions, cannot ascend. It remains trapped in kama loka, an intermediate astral state bordering the physical world. What lingers here is the kama rupa, the astral shell left behind after the physical body dies, retaining the shape and lower impulses of the deceased. In kama loka, these shells slowly dissolve, fragmenting and fading away as their remaining earthly passions are exhausted. This process identifies the flaw in the spiritualist movement. Mediums interact with these fading, hollow astral shells hovering in the atmosphere. These shells can appear to communicate when reanimated by elementals, semi-intelligent nature spirits lacking a permanent form. When an elemental enters the shell, it reanimates a psychic hard drive. It can mimic the deceased person's voice and recall their habits, but it possesses no true consciousness or soul. The entities appearing in seance parlors are devoid of the human spirit. They are psychic echoes animated by parasitic forces to deceive the living. While the lower shell decays, the immortal ego enters devachan, a state of blissful spiritual assimilation. Devachan is a subjective, dreamlike consciousness where the ego absorbs the highest experiences of its past life. Reincarnation is a slow process. The ego remains in devachan for an immense duration, typically 1,500 to 3,000 years. This delay is dictated by karma, a strict equation of cause and effect requiring immense time to process a lifespan's moral weight. Because this law of delay is absolute, the systemic anomalies are revealing. Under what conditions does this mathematical rule break down? Blavatsky identified specific teratological exceptions. The rule of delay is bypassed in cases of premature infant death or congenital idiocy. Dying before the immortal ego fuses with the mind generates zero karma. Because devachan requires karmic weight to process, an entity with zero karma is rejected. It is forced to retry the physical plane, looping back into a new body without delay. The circle of necessity is an impartial system. Reincarnation is a mathematical necessity driven entirely by the weight of moral action. Defining the mechanics of death inevitably forces a redefinition of actual life. Blavatsky found a clear articulation of this in the writings of Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy argued that biological life, when driven purely by an isolated animal ego, is an illusion. Tolstoy described the animal ego as a pendulum, oscillating endlessly between satisfying individual needs and facing inevitable destruction by a hostile universe. Any ego seeking purely personal satisfaction is fighting a losing battle against eternity. Every passing second brings physical decay closer, poisoning the experience of life with the constant fear of death. This applies even to the highest levels of historical power. Tolstoy noted that the German Empire forged by Prince Bismarck and the dinner Bismarck's cook prepared for him share the same fate. Both are temporary and ultimately irrelevant to the universal life. A physical life lived strictly to serve and preserve the false personality is a state of living death, ending only in despair. True life begins only when the intellect consciously subjugates the animal instinct to universal reason. The karmic cycle refines the immortal ego through the repeated creation and shedding of false personalities. With each cycle, it extracts the purest spiritual experience, pulling that essence upward and leaving base desires to dissolve. This process converts base animal experience into permanent conscious awareness over thousands of lifetimes. Blavatsky connects this realization to the ancient metaphor of the Sphinx, the guardian of the mysteries of existence. The esoteric answer to the Sphinx's riddle is a warning. Failing to recognize the illusion of your own animal identity ensures your spiritual destruction. To truly live, you must realize that the temporary version of you seeking survival is exactly what must be discarded. Only by shedding the false personality can the immortal ego continue its ascent toward universal consciousness.